The Naga are one of the most iconic characters in the entire Warcraft series, mainly because we were actually able to play as them back in Warcraft 3. They're one of the most popular options, most speculated new races that we would get, but it never really came to be. A lot of people considered the limitations due to their form, but realistically some super interesting concepts exist, the so-called Nazdorei. We could have two Naga forms, one obviously the Naga, and the second Highborn one, but in order to not get yet another elven race that no one wants, they could significantly be modified to resemble the Jinyu and be a lot more fish-like. They could have some unique swimming abilities, they could use tridents, they could use snares, and as they used to be Highborn that ruled over the entirety of Azeroth, they would be amazing spellcasters wielding essentially every type of magic. Most recently, we learned about Azshara returning and the Naga. There are hints of a new continent, sea, pirate expansion, which could just be the opportunity for Blizzard to add them. So could we see playable Naga in the near future, and how would this race work? It is literally the third year that Ridge Wallet sent me this thing, and I've been using it pretty much ever since. I haven't used anything else. They've also sent me the key case, which matches everything perfectly, and there's just so many designs you can choose from. The wallet is super useful. You can put cash, you can put up to 12 cards. It's really just great. Now, if you use my code Doron, you can get a really great discount, so make sure to check out my link in the description below and get your own Ridge Wallet or key case. This one is a bit weird. I can definitely stand behind the idea that we really don't need any more playable elves. Even the drag tier dragons that we just received in the Dragonfight are essentially elves, but I feel like the Naga may just be the exception here, as while they are elves, they are some of the most iconic characters in the entire Warcraft series. Together with the ogres, this might be the most requested new playable race that people have wanted pretty much since the Burning Crusade, maybe even Classic, and honestly, rightfully so, because we actually played with these guys back in Warcraft 3 and they were pretty fleshed out, and they still are pretty fleshed out. You literally had a Naga base, various Naga classes, and they used to kinda be the good guys, at least for a while, until they went crazy on Outland. However, later down the line, Illidan was redeemed, so maybe they weren't even all that evil. Now, in BFA, there was the perfect opportunity, as we had a brand new Naga zone, there was Queen Azshara, a bunch of Naga just everywhere, and that might have been the opportunity to add them, but much like the rest of BFA, this didn't really add up too much. However, now things are changing, as in 10.0.7 we have received nearly 5 years later brand new Naga hints. Apparently, Queen Azshara is coming back in Dragonfight. They're talking about Harbingers, old god prophecies, and whatnot. I'm not going to delve too deep into this. If you want further info, I have an entire video covering the most recent documents and all the Naga hints. However, what is incredibly important to note is that apparently this document was found in a Naga cave on the Dragon Isles, and they're talking about how the queen calls from the Umbral Whale, which in Warcraft terms means the Void Whale. As you may remember, back in BFA, Azshara attempted to betray N'Zoth. He took her somewhere, which now almost certainly has been revealed to be the Void Realm. Now, Azshara is said to be returning, but we don't know whether she's really returning as an independent actor or if she's just a mindless old god agent slash weapon. Seeing that the document talks about void prophecies, the latter is the most likely option. However, Azshara is one of the most powerful beings to really have ever lived on Azeroth. She's ancient, and at one point in time, she essentially ruled over most of Azeroth. Like, you can look up the Night Elven Empire, so I really don't think she's going to allow herself to be used so simply just as a pawn of the old gods. This opens up a lot of options for the Naga to eventually be playable. Of course, it is too early to say, but keep in mind, the Naga haven't always really been villains, as we played with them, as I said, in Warcraft 3. They even aided Illidan in defeating the Burning Legion. We only joined him later on his mission. When you think about it, a lot of Naga really are victims. I mean, they were highborn elves that fell under the sea with the Sundering, and subsequently they were twisted by the old gods. I mean, you could say they joined them willingly, but like, let's be real, when you're drowning as the earth is falling apart in a worldwide cataclysm, you really would make a pact with the devil if it would mean survival and not drowning. This has been evident with the fact that Azshara attempted to rebel. However, a lot of the Naga have been Naga longer than really they have been elves, so the underwater is more their heritage than the land ever was, which could definitely separate them from the other elven-like races. So I could totally see multiple scenarios. We could have an Azshara redemption arc, which I don't really think would be too likely, as despite being manipulated and all that, she definitely did do a lot of evil things herself, and a lot of elves definitely wouldn't really be up to this idea. However, we could get a bunch of Naga splitting away from Azshara when they realize that she's a pawn of the void. As I said, the Naga didn't really join the old gods willingly, and now they have been treating their queen really badly, and they realize she no longer has free will, so we could definitely find some type of a rebellious group that could join our factions. I could also totally see Tyrande accepting these guys back, as first of all, the Night Elves really need reinforcements, they're in a really bad shape, and these guys used to be the same race over 10,000 years ago. The Night Elves did actually accept the Highborn back in the recent times, even though they were exiled, so that is the possible story justification. It can definitely be done, but let's get into how they would work as a race and how possible would this scenario be really. Most of the concepts I'm talking about here are inspired by a thread that you guys can find on MMO Champion with a concept called the Nazdorei, as I still think a lot of these are actually really good ideas. I mean, sure, quite a bit of a change since this was written around BFA, but with the most recent information, I think a lot of this can actually be super relevant, and it is also super interesting. So, the main idea is that it would work much like the Worgen or the Direct here, meaning that the Nazdorei would have two forms. One would obviously be the Naga, and the other Elven form. I am aware, no one really is a fan of yet another Elven playable race, but I think this one can be modified significantly. I mean, keep in mind, the Naga spent over 10,000 years under the sea, so their Elven form would definitely have changed to a significant extent over that time period. We haven't actually seen them being able to shift back and forth between Elf and Naga form, because as far as we know, they were permanently transformed, but if they break free from old god magic, if there's some massive changes, I could totally see this happening. So the regular Naga form could have the bigger Myrmidon type and the more slender spellcaster Naga form. The Elven one could be similar quite a bit to the Highborn, because they obviously used to be Highborn, but it could have scales and a whole bunch of underwater fish-like features, mainly being similar to the Jinyu, like more to the Jinyu than they would be to the actual Highborn, which, as I said, would definitely offset the fact that we have just too many elves. The Nazdorei concept mentions some very unique underwater abilities, so passive swimming that would immediately turn you into a Naga, which I can't say is the most useful passive ability, but it could be interesting and useful, especially if the next expansion is related to pirates, new continents, islands, as a lot of hints currently suggest. The concept also mentions some unique fighting abilities when in water, which, as I said, kind of like the previous one, would be interesting if the Isles of the next expansion, but I can't see this being particularly useful in PvP arenas or whatnot. However, they could definitely have a lot of really unique Naga abilities, so they could cast waves, they could use those snares that the Naga Myrmidons had back in Warcraft 3, and there could also be a lot of spellcasting, because Naga, other than being the Naga, are the Highborn that used to be the best spellcasters in the world that essentially lorded over Azeroth. In terms of classes, I think they could be open to a lot of options, but not really all that diverse. I definitely couldn't imagine Naga Death Knights or Naga Monks, but I'm guessing the two bread and butter classes would be the Warriors and the Spellcasters. Warriors would mainly be tied to the Myrmidons, and they could have those really unique trident weapons, kinda similar to how the Demon Hunters have their own glaives, which would really make them stand out from others. Maybe Blizzard could even invent the Myrmidon class for the Naga, which would focus on snares, traps, and using the trident, but I kinda doubt this. In terms of spellcasting, I can totally see the Naga being open to a lot of opportunities. As I said, they were literally the best spellcasters in the entire world, and recently they work with Illidan, meaning they're more than likely used to Fel. They have been old god servants, so they use the powers of the void, so anything from a Naga mage to a Naga warlock or a Naga shadow priest is definitely 100% possible. In terms of classes like the rogues, with the fact that we have Tauren rogues, anything could become a reality, really. However, I can definitely see the rogues working in the Naga Elven form, which could totally work the exact same way as the Night Elven rogues. Hunters could definitely be a possibility with many possible iconic turtles, maybe Murloc type pets they could use, or some type of eels. And as I said, we had Myrmidons, which were something like a mix between a hunter and a warrior, although mainly leaning towards a warrior tank. So overall, realistically, this could definitely totally work. The main issue with too many elves could definitely be offset by some changes to their current elven form, and all the limitations with the Naga form could be changed by introducing two forms to them, so working exactly the same as the Worgen. I actually think this might be, other than the ogres, the most popular choice, and a lot of people would be open to playing the Naga, as they're super iconic in the series. In fact, I think if people had to choose between the Dynactyr or the Naga, like 9 out of 10 people would pick the Naga. With the recent Azshara hints, Naga returning, the possibilities of the next expansion involving the other side of Azeroth, pirates, isles, and the sea, a pretty big new opportunity is opening for Blizzard to once again reconsider this option. Thank you for watching. Check out how Kalimdor changed over the years by clicking on the screen, and check out Doronsmovies Academy for videos on real-world history. See you next time!